Carl Linnaeus was a Swede who lived in the 1700s, and he wanted to classify all of life's forms. He wanted to classify the living world. Linnaeus came after people like Newton and Leeuwenhoek. Leeuwenhoek was known for his work with microscopes and looking at protists. Newton was known for theories like gravity, light, the telescope, and others. So Linnaeus wanted to classify all living things so that they fit into some comprehensive structure or framework that is easily accessible but also equally detailed to accurately describe the real world. So using a modern conception of life, if we want to think about the beginning of life, we could go back to some sort of primordial soup, which may have existed about 4 billion years ago. But the point here is that we've sort of reached a point in the development of Earth's history where life arose. So there's this definite barrier between something that is not living and something that is living. Even if we change our conception of what it means to be living, we will still encounter barriers of some sort. So the way that we classify life is based on these metrics like growth or reproduction or ability to perform respiration or movement. So all of these different things around us, all these phenomena such as fire and water and rivers and minerals and protozoa and protists, they all they all lie on different positions on these spectrums. So in the 1950s, there was this experiment where they turned molecules that were considered non-living into molecules that are considered organic or produced by living things. So we've got some gases that contain carbon, and we don't have oxygen gas because that hadn't developed yet, and we created things like simple sugars and the building blocks of protein. So this theory is quite interesting because they used sparks of electricity to kind of mimic lightning in the primitive atmosphere. But whatever we think about the first life form, we can at least recognize that there's something interesting about crystals. Crystals seem to grab our attention, and some people even think they've got these mysterious qualities about them. But if we just look at them from a phenomenological perspective, we can see that they are these interesting objects with kind of shapes and straight edges and forms, and they also develop between two sort of influences. They grow off a platform and they are replenished by the other realm, the realm that they're growing in or growing into. So there's some sort of fixed phase that could perhaps represent the past, if you're thinking about a growing crystal, the part that has already grown. And then you can think about this fast-paced surface of exchange of ions. And there's like this increased interaction, and there's this complex interplay, but it's well defined by rule systems, and it builds these very uniform structures, which crystals are, these crystal lattice structures. So now if I take this idea to plants, we see how the plants have their roots in the ground and their leaves are in the atmosphere, and both ends of the plant, the roots and the leaves, are exchanging with the environment, but the sphere of influence of the atmosphere is much larger, and it's almost like with wind and wind currents around the world, the trees on one end of the earth, one side of the earth, are communicating with trees on the other side, because if one rainforest produces a lot of oxygen, then there's going to be some shift and some balancing. There's a constant balancing, whereas the solid ground has more potential to have closed systems, and it's similar to that interface that crystals grow on. So now if we take this idea of this type of interface and we get a bit silly with it, we can extend it to the idea of organisms, like the organism has both the metabolism and the mind, and maybe the metabolism is more like the fixed structure of the platform, and maybe the mind is more this quick exchanging kind of realm with this heightened interaction and this realm of attention. Then we can even expand this idea to represent the entire history of the world, and the history, the genetic pathways of history up until the present moment. So that history of genetics is now interacting in the present moment with the present moment, and making ideas about how to move into the future. So these ideas about the present moment are in the social realm and in the societal realm, where we remark about the present world and we remark our feelings about certain things and other people, and our opinions and our feelings and our the way we think things are. So you can imagine this kind of moving up, and then the mental is kind of like this looking back upon. So before we get too carried away with ourselves, let's look at Carl Linnaeus, and he made a system, and the system has two sides. On the one hand, he had the broadest classifications of life, and on the other hand, he had the detailed. So the broadest classification is living things are, and this is how he classified it. He divided life into three: mineral, plant, and animal. And so obviously this decision to put mineral as a living thing is interesting from our perspective, but his decision to do other things, like put humans as part of animals, were also radical for his own time. So it's like either way he was going to have to break some sort of traditions and previous ways of looking at the world, because you are classifying everything, you're drawing lines on the world. So here's a viewing of his system and its hierarchy. So if you can imagine how the branches spread out to the twigs, it's the same way that his classification system works. It branches out from fewer to more. Today we start with life as some sort of thing that contains cells or performs respiration or something, and then from there we move into two, which is domain of prokaryote and eukaryote. Linnaeus started with three, and they were not the domains, they were the kingdoms, and they were the mineral, plant, and animal. Today we have 5 kingdoms. Eubacteria and archaea are the prokaryotes, and then in the eukaryotes we've got 4. We've got the protists, which are all the microscopic animals and plants and fungi, and then we've got the macroscopic, which are the actual plants and animals and fungi. So if we take a modern day look at the how we conceive the tree of life. If we take a look at the animal kingdom, we see it progresses from the microscopic animals to the worms and sponges, and then to the polyps, and then to land worms and land sort of like protists that are bigger, maybe the rotifers, to mollusks, crustaceans, insects, arachnids, myriapods, and then finally we have the chordata, which are the animals that that Linnaeus recognized as. So during Linnaeus's time, there were classes, and we can look at some organisms that do not fit into categories very well, and this just reinforces the point about the classification system not showing the creative side of life, and how we get these crossovers and these shared characteristics and these weird outliers. We have the norm and we have outliers, and so having a taxonomical system sort of puts life into these boxes, and some might think that's not fair, and there are problems with those boxes. But even if we recognize a problem with drawing boundaries on the world, we can still see how we cannot avoid this boundary between non-living and living world. And something that the life world always points towards is soul or spirit or named thing. And a named thing has been named by something. So the soul is that which is perceived, but we also imagine that it exists apart from being perceived, although we can't imagine a perceived without a perceiver. So it always seems to be this double aspect system. It is also kind of a double aspect system in that it ranges from, earlier I talked about the simple side of the classification system and the detailed side, and the soul does that in that it encompasses both the general vibe of someone and the detailed situations or moments that define that person for some people, for some perceivers. So if we think about this transition from non-living to living, we get this idea about the soul and how can it help us think about life. Well, life developed within its structure it had a membrane and a nucleus with a genetic material. So it's doing some sort of interaction with the world, and then it's developing a code, and then it's passing the code down through time. So how could that benefit a soul? Well, if that code allows the organism to continue surviving and continue doing what it's doing, living within that interface, then it can perhaps serve the soul by allowing the soul to maybe experience the reality better, or as it grows in complexities, it can be aware more of its situation, perhaps. So if we talk about awareness, then we think about consciousness, which is this really difficult concept because it's like mysterious. We can't account for it. It's the platform which it has arisen from seems to be mysterious and almost invisible. We don't understand how the self is related to the othered reality. But how can consciousness help us think about life? And we can think about life as consciousness, and consciousness is basically this connection between a perceiver and perceived. So consciousness completes that circle of performance for something and the performance being received by something else. I think one of the best theories for life is entropy, and entropy represents how energy naturally spreads out. And if you can concentrate energy, then it can be helpful for someone or something. So the sun represents a kind of ball of concentrated energy, and it's being given to the world, and the bio realm, the biosphere, lives on the surface of the world, and it receives this energy from the sun, and it can use it to grow and develop. But if we think about the forces that are opposite to entropy, then it almost seems like unnatural. Like, entropy is increasing disorder. What is increasing order? It must be some sort of mysterious force. But we have this skill. I mean, humans can tidy their room or comprehend a system. And so we are sort of agents of reversing entropy. But if we consider Linnaeus's mineral, then we can really see why crystals are so fascinating and why people believe they have these mystical properties. It's because they represent an aspect of our universe that is showing us a reversal of entropy. So entropy allows us to think back about before and after our solar system, and what are galaxies and black holes, and how did the solar system seems to be created this Goldilocks zone. So we think about the concept of just right, and how life often exists within this there's this kind of balancing act, but it's also there's this conduit or space that it exists within and can be healthy within. There's limits, and the dialectics of life create a pathway, a synthesis, which is our reality. So there are different contributors to our reality. There are some opposing ideas, there are some styles of behavior, there are some philosophies and kind of political spectrums. And there's also the idea that society can do well or badly, so there's upward and downward trajectories. So we cannot escape, there's this position of the organism within this interface of competing dialectics, and it's interesting to think about who we are competing for and what's receiving our performance, and how it makes us stronger and better and flourish, how the physical can flourish. And so maybe the best way to think about life is something that is growing upwards naturally in order to reach some sort of level of awareness, or maybe it's something that can achieve this top-down influence, but it grows within a very careful set guidelines or environment or rules, and it has to do this balancing act, this constant balancing act, in order to not become stale. So it must be striving upwards. And so the problem with taxonomy is that it's a theory about the real world, and we realize that there's this kind of separation between theory and reality, and how the theory is trying to comprehend the world, so it's not doing anything nefarious, but it's not right, because the world is just this thing, this dynamic, moving, growing system with no set boundaries, but the theory is trying to impose some sort of structure onto it. And so I've noticed that when we do inquiry, when we want to comprehend our world, we sort of have some sort of catch or question or some kind of light in the distance that's a destination or point of intrigue or some sort of something catching our attention, and we're heading towards that. And it can be a boundary, such as the boundary between the non-living and the living, but then we also at the same time don't really want to reach a destination, because then we will create some sort of hard, crusty, fixed, dogmatic system that cannot represent the dynamic nature of the real living world.